This week's Torah portion is the portion called Yitro. And if you ask anybody what's special about this parsha, about this portion, they would tell you it's the event at Sinai. God gave us the 10 Commandments. Big event. Life-changing, world-changing event. But let's follow the process. How did we get to this point? So let's look at what happened. God creates Adam and Chava. He creates them. He literally forms them out of the earth, and he breathes life into them, and he puts them in the Garden of Eden. There's a lot of stuff going on there in the relationship between creator and creation. That was the relationship that is obvious. Of course, there's much more behind the scenes, but the obvious thing is God creates human beings, Adam and Chava. The next stage, the next step, is Noach finds favor in God's eyes. That's a whole new experience. That someone, a human being, can actually please God. God is pleased with Noach, Noach's behavior. The relationship is improving. What's the next step? Vayemer Hashem el Avram. God comes and seeks out Avraham, tells him to relocate to the land that God chooses, and creates a special bond with Avraham and his descendants. Now we're getting a little more serious. There's a commitment here. There's a covenant. Of course, then there was Yitzchak, and then there was Yaakov and Yosef, and all that happened with the exodus from Egypt. Avraham's children become a nation. Now we come to this week's portion, and we read, God came down to Mount Sinai and spoke these words, the 10 Commandments. The relationship has taken a giant step forward. So if we follow the process, we're actually describing the development, the unfolding, the flowering of a relationship. So the very significant phrase, God descended on Har Sinai. God comes down, makes himself more available than he ever was before. This is the way history progresses. From time to time, stage by stage, God becomes more available to earth, because the entire program, of course, is to bring God down to earth. God desires a dwelling place in the lowest world. How is this happening? Torah describes it. Step by step, one stage after another. And what we're being told is that this process will continue until God will be one and his name will be one. The world and God will be completely united. The other thing we're being told is, keep up. Don't be left behind. Don't get stuck in the stages that preceded your time, because every time God makes himself more available, you got to go with it. Every effort, every act of closeness must be reciprocated. So if God reaches out, if God initiates a deeper bond, it would be very rude not to respond and not to reciprocate. And that's why we have had a Moshe a teacher in every generation, in every era, who would tell us something new has developed. God has become closer. God is making himself more available. Let's respond. Let's reciprocate. So we had the sages, the early sages, the later sages, sages of the Mishnah, sages of the Talmud. We've had tzaddikim. We have Rebbe. They keep us in touch. They keep us up to date. And when these changes happen, they tell us how to respond so that we don't get left behind. Like, for example, Avraham served God by keeping all the mitzvahs that were given to Noah, plus the mitzvah of circumcision, which was given to him. He also introduced the idea of praying every morning and knowing what God is going to command the Jews in the Torah 400 years in the future. He already began to keep those commandments. They were not obligatory. They hadn't been revealed, but he kept them voluntarily. How different is it, keeping the mitzvahs voluntarily versus keeping the mitzvahs as a response to God's initiative? God comes down to Mount Sinai and says, "These are the mitzvahs I need you to do." We react. How much more significant is that than Avraham, who, having a prophetic knowledge of the commandments, volunteers to do them before they're even given? How different? It's like the difference between a courtship and a marriage. Very different. It's a giant step forward in a relationship. So today in our world, what's still missing? We have God's commandments. He came down to Mount Sinai, made himself available. We're keeping the commandments. We've been keeping the commandments for 3,333 years. What more? Well, we know that many of the commandments were clarified, the details were made known in the years after the giving of the Torah, through the sages of the Talmud, the sages of the Mishnah. So we're not only keeping the mitzvahs, but we're keeping them properly with all their details, with every nuance. So now what? Hasidus came along and said there's one more thing we need to do. We need to stop being strangers to God and to his mitzvahs. If you obey the commandments, you and the commandment, you and the commander of the commandment remain strangers. You're cooperating, maybe even partnering with God in creation, but still strangers. He's the commander, we are the commanded, those are the commandments. Too much stuff going on, each of them a separate entity, a separate reality. Now is the time where we not only partner with God, but we absorb godliness. We become one with the mitzvah, become one with God. Now, of course, that's going to be fulfilled with the coming of Mashiach. But we got to start practicing. We got to start tasting what is to come. like that bumper sticker, visualize world peace. Before there's actually world peace, we have to be able to visualize it. We have to get a taste of it. So now is the time when we start to think about the oneness of God with his creation, with his mitzvahs, with his people, so that when we do the mitzvah, we're not a creation serving a creator. We are a piece of him reuniting with him. It's very different. We'll talk more about it. We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.